Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
America's export of soybeans helps the U.S. maintain a positive agricultural trade balance. Nebraska contributes half of its soybeans for export. The protein and oil content in soybeans enhance the growing demand for higher protein diets. The Nebraska Soybean Board promotes research to develop new soybean varieties with higher protein and oil content for major agricultural markets. The Nebraska Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Market Journal, television for making agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension, where you can know how, know now. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. This week you'll see reports from the UNL Beef Feedlot Roundtable in West Point, where Shane Ellis from Iowa State analyzes the cattle markets. Galen Erickson and Terry Mader update us on new UNL beef research, and we'll have more from the Animal Welfare Conference held here on campus last week. We start today across the border in Iowa, where a Chinese trade delegation agreed, albeit ceremoniously, to purchase about 317 million bushels of U.S. soybeans. Chinese Vice President Xi Jinping returned to the state he visited in 1985, representing a country that imports nearly 60% of the world's soybeans. A member of the U.S. Soybean Export Council told press at the event that China consumes around 25% of all U.S. soybean products. Shane Ellis from Iowa State is our marketing analyst this week. Shane is an extension livestock economist. We talked to him in West Point. At a time when cattle supply is down, exports are up, and if the recession is in fact turning, consumption should rise. So we started by asking, what's the downside?
We've definitely seen a lot of strength from our consumer side. The domestic demand has really been holding its own lately, especially with the increased price of cattle and beef at retail. We really have to give hats off to the consumer for the amount of demand and quantity that they've been consuming, even at the current prices. What we have to worry about is we've had this improving demand since basically the end of 2009. Improved returns also at the cattle margins as well as prices during that same period of time. What we have to worry about is in the second half of this year, could there be another turn in the economy? Once again, that's, I think, the biggest worry right now. Right now we have a tremendous amount of bullish pressure pushing on this market, and so that's why we're seeing these futures prices going out into the end of the year and in the coming year of over 130 for live cattle. That's a fantastic price. That shows us that bullish pressure. How much can it really handle if we start to see the economy start to take another downturn?
And one of the bullish factors is that supply, and as you noted, around 91 million head in inventory in the U.S. Should we expect that to turn, and if so, when?
I think that we're starting to see, well, it's a big boat to turn whenever we're going to increase a number of cattle here in the United States. We tend to go through a 10-year cyclical period. We may start to see those total cattle numbers start to turn and increase by the beginning of 2015. It takes a while to have the heifers develop to go in as replacements, and we need to not be killing as many cull cows as we have been also if we plan on increasing our calf crop.
And one of the things you mentioned today is there's not only a battle of acres between corn and soybeans, but also if you're going to try and increase the cow numbers, there's a battle of acres of where to put them.
Absolutely, and with the southern plains and the drought that they have had last year and in the coming years, they're not going to be able to rebuild that same capacity that they had a few years ago overnight. It'll take several years of decent moisture before we start to see those cow numbers back up to that same level that it was a few years ago. Where does that leave us here up in the northern plains states, where we have that competition in many areas between pasture land and row crops? Where do we put the cattle? Well, we have to improve the carrying capacity of the pastures that we already have, or somewhere along the line, we're going to have to pull some acres from some place if we plan on increasing our cow numbers and maintaining those increased numbers in the coming years.
You mentioned the consumer earlier. Step back just a bit further. What's the mindset of the retailer right now for a person who's buying expensive beef and trying to move it on to a consumer at record high prices?
Well, definitely what we have been seeing, fourth quarter of last year and even the first part of this year, retailers were not in a big hurry to sell the beef that they had purchased at a high price at a loss. And so that's why we didn't see a lot of beef being featured, didn't see a lot of sales at the retail counter where they were trying to move massive quantities. They just hated to sell it at such a loss. And because of that, we've seen a little bit of a backlog at the retail level where retailers aren't necessarily hurting. They've got plenty of supply that they had to pay too much for. They're not willing to quite bite the bullet yet. They're still hoping to pass that cost on to the consumer. As
we look at high corn prices going into summer, describe your ISU profitability model and how that lays out with what we're going to see for the next few months here.
We try to predict what the profit margins can be, or we show what profit margins could be locked in, what kind of margins you could have between your key inputs of corn and feeder animals, margin between those two key inputs, and the value of the fed animal. And we try to project that using futures prices, adjust it for the basis. And looking at that, we see that animals that are on feed right now, it's looking pretty good. We're going to see some pretty nice profit margins going on through for animals that are on feed right now. Once we get into animals that are being placed in the coming months, there's not necessarily a lot of promise, just the increased cost of those feeder animals is really causing those margins to collapse and be incredibly tight.
Frayne Olson from North Dakota State will be our analyst next week. Frayne will take a look at the wheat markets with us, and we'll talk to him on the morning of the latest USDA report on the outlook for U.S. agricultural trade. In what will undoubtedly play a part again in profitability this year, oil prices are once again on the rise. $119 a barrel is a 6-month high according to Reuters after Iran announced it would stop oil exports to 6 European states. In its reporting on the gasoline side, the Associated Press says while the national average for gas has reached above $3.50 a gallon in just 3 different years, it's never happened this early. From cattle markets to consumer preferences, we've talked a lot about the beef industry these last few weeks here on Market Journal. As our coverage continues, Kurtis Harms examines environmental issues related to the industry and how University of Nebraska-Lincoln researchers are working to overcome these obstacles.
As the world's population continues to grow, more food will be needed to feed the world's people. The livestock industry is one food-producing sector that may experience challenges as production demands increase. The livestock industry's carbon footprint is one area to be aware of, according to the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension beef cattle specialist, Terry Mader.
Carbon footprint deals with greenhouse gases, and so again, are we impeding on other people's space? So that's really the issue, and so the population growth tends to promote this type of discourse.
In beef production, the carbon footprint is measured from the beginning of an animal's life all the way through final processing. Throughout this life cycle, greenhouse gases are produced.
As it turns out, the amount of greenhouse gas produced by our beef cattle operations in, say, North America is about 20–25% more than what, say, the bison produced here in the 1800s. And so it isn't all that much, and then we're harvesting beef products from that, where the bison, the Indians, I guess, or Native Americans consume some of them, but still.
Mader says the carbon footprint can be reduced by improving efficiency in beef production, such as feed efficiency. By producing more and using fewer resources such as nitrogen, phosphorus, and water, beef producers will produce less greenhouse gases. Another concern some people have is the possible contamination of the environment due to growth hormone usage.
Our research basically showed that yeah, we do produce these things. They are excreted by the animal. Well, they're produced. Some of these hormones are produced in the animal. We provided some supplemental protein hormones, and then they're excreted by the animal, metabolized in the animal to a certain extent, but also metabolized in the environment. And we didn't see a big difference between whether these animals received these products or did not receive them as far as what was left in the animal waste.
Mader says these hormones, natural and synthetic, are broken down in the environment, but more research is needed to understand the amount of time needed for this process. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Kurtis Harms.
Thanks, Kurtis. We'll have more reports from the 2012 Nebraska Beef Feedlot Roundtable Series coming up in a few minutes. UNL Extension Western Nebraska crop specialist Bob Klein says now is a good time for winter wheat farmers to control for weeds. Klein says a good winter wheat crop plays a direct role in the yield of corn and grain sorghum planted after. Klein says the common question he gets around this time is whether or not to combine fertilizers and herbicides.
We usually recommend against it. We've done research out here at the West Central Research Extension Center for a number of years, and you can't always tell when you're going to have injury. 2 times we actually had injury that lowered our wheat yields about 30%. Other times no injury, and then other times 10 or 15%. Our general recommendation out here is to put on the fertilizer treatments early and then come back with the appropriate herbicide when it's timely for the weed control. And so we really like to split those treatments.
Klein says producers can use the latest weed management guide labeled EC 130 to see treatment ratings. That guide is available online and at your local extension office. At last week's Animal Welfare Conference on campus, we talked with Candace Croney from Purdue University. She's an associate professor in animal behavior and well-being and said in her lecture that what consumers want and what agriculture provides are the same thing. So we asked if that's the case, then where's the discord?
What people are asking us to do now, in addition to providing safe, affordable, tasty, very affordable food, I say affordable twice for a reason,
right?
And food that's always readily accessible, it's there whenever people want it, is they're starting to ask us to produce that food in a way that is respectful of the environment, respectful of the animals that are in there, and of the other people in the chain. Okay, and so animal welfare is the piece that I was focused on a little bit more today, because what people are telling us is they care about how those animals become food and how they're treated in the process that leads up to that.
And one of those parts is, let's just take hogs, for example, and stalls, sows in stalls for gestation. And one of the things you said is what we're missing when we talk about fixing that problem is what consumers perceive. But isn't there something to be said that they already know, we've already told them multiple times what we're doing to make that different, and they just ignore it or don't care about hearing it?
I don't know that we've actually done a brilliant job of telling consumers why we keep sows in stalls or why we even developed that form of housing to begin with. I'm not sure the average person has gotten that message. I see nothing that leads me to believe that the average person knows that.
So how do we fail there? Where did we fail?
Well, I think it's partly who we're talking to and where we're putting our education and who our target audiences are. And so oftentimes we think, well, if we just put this information on our websites and people will know it, or if we go to something, and typically it's an ag event, and tell people this, they'll get it. And so if you think about the number of people who are unlikely to go to an ag site or unlikely to go to an agricultural event, that's a pretty large number of people. So we may have the information, but I'm not sure we're really putting it in the hands of the people who are genuinely interested in these areas.
And one of the questions asked today was then where do we go?
Yeah, well, I can't give you all of the answers to that, but what I can tell you is we need to start thinking a little bit more creatively, right? So for instance, we've got groups that we partner with. We have, for instance, lots of folks who are interested in companion animals, who feed their companion animals some of our animal products, right? One of the things that we don't do a really good job of doing is explaining to food companies that produce pet animal foods how we produce our animals that are going into their products, and what we do to ensure the best possible care for them as well. Because, if you are the average person who owns a companion animal and you're reading the labels of the things you're feeding your animals, you might actually get some of that information there, and we don't put it there.
One of the words you used there was partner. Is it safe to say that sometimes when we talk about consumer versus producer, it's more of a battle than a partnership?
Absolutely, and that's one of the reasons why I talk about the urban-rural connections, because oftentimes we forget that we are completely interdependent on each other. Those of us who live in urban and suburban environments need people who give us food, and we oftentimes take them for granted and forget that they're actually there. Those who are dealing with, rural production issues, who are really just trying to find good ways to put food on the table, oftentimes see consumers as being, problems for them to deal with all of these pesky issues they keep raising. We're in a partnership, and we have to make it work.
You said today the most important thing to take away, animal welfare issues are not about animals, they're about what animals represent. Explain that.
Yeah, okay, I'll elaborate a little bit. So animal welfare issues really are about animals, but the truth of the matter is the reason people get so worked up about them and so irate and so emotionally overwrought is because animals have come to represent, for many of us, really valuable characteristics that oftentimes used to and still, are reminiscent of important treasured relationships we have or have had with other people. Okay? And so for the person who is really concerned about the sow in a gestation crate, or stall, whichever you prefer, and what her quality of life is like in that stall, it probably has more to do with some sort of alliance or understanding of what it might be like to be in that position, okay? And in terms of how that ties back to some of the relationships we talked about, if you are the person who has a relationship with any sort of animal that matters to you, that you feel invested in and that you want to protect, then certainly you're more likely to get a little bit upset, or at least be more likely to think about what that experience might be like for the sow and then leave thinking that maybe this isn't the best way to raise sows.
And later this month, we'll show you our interview with Kim Stackhouse-Lawson from the Beef Cattle Institute at Kansas State about cultural changes in animal welfare and changing negative perceptions. The FCC moved this week to revoke LightSquared's permit for a new high-speed wireless network after concluding it would, in cases, jam personal navigation and GPS devices. The move is now subject to public comment and could be overturned, but LightSquared has fought this battle for months now. American Soybean Association President Steve Wellman told Brownfield Ag News it's a great relief for farmers who use GPS, while noting there is a pressing need for better broadband, especially in rural America. Wet conditions last spring allowed some nitrogen to leach out of the soil profile, making it unavailable to the crop. And as you'll read in the February Nebraska Farmer, that has triggered renewed interest in fertigation. Spoon-feeding nitrogen through pivots is a way to apply nutrients to corn plants when they need it. You can learn about the equipment, training, and permitting process for fertigation in the February Nebraska Farmer. At the Beef Feedlot Roundtable earlier this week in West Point, we talked with UNL Extension beef specialist Galen Erickson about his latest research, including transitioning cattle moving into feedlots from forage-based to grain diets.
Yeah, it's common for feedlots when cattle first come into the feedlot to transition them off of forage-based diets to grain. And most people think there's only one way to do that. And over the last few years, we've actually determined that there's a dozen ways to do that. And interestingly, they all work pretty well. So we've been looking at using byproducts and different types of byproducts instead of forage. And the cattle adapt well.
So give me an example of that. I mean, and first off, I guess we should say, why did you start looking into this, or what made you think you could?
Well, as everyone's well aware, the byproduct supply is dramatically greater, which usually means that prices are very competitive. And forage supply is not, it's variable from year to year, and prices are variable from year to year. And most importantly, feedlots really do not want to handle forages or roughages because they're so bulky and relative to their nutrient content so expensive. So all feedlots would like to have alternatives to forage, so it was a logical fit to be evaluating it.
Give me an example of something that works and you think is beneficial for a producer.
Well, the Sweet brand, which is the Cargill's gluten feed, and gluten feed work really well. In fact, it improves performance over just using forage to step cattle up. But distillers' grains don't work quite as well, and actually combinations then of gluten feed and distillers work well. And then there's a couple other new commercial byproduct products that are available that work well.
Is there another step in this research?
Well, most of it's, I would say, completed. We're debating on where to go next. For instance, my colleagues at Scotts Bluff at the Panhandle Research Extension Center have been looking at beet pulp, because that's a common byproduct of that area. So yes, I think that it opens the doors that anything that's not grain may work to adapt cattle, but I don't know which direction we'll go because we've evaluated most of the byproducts we have here in central east Nebraska.
You'll also be talking today about updates on other UNL research, and something we've talked about on this show is ethanol production. And while it may be scaling back, one of the things you're looking at is using corn syrup from ethanol plants to feed to cattle. Talk a little bit about that research.
Yeah, this is a liquid supplement that comes out of the plants. It handles like a liquid, and I would say the value's been less known in the past, and so most of the previous work done back in the 90s was feeding it up to 10 or 12% of the diet. And we've been looking at feeding it at 20, 30 or more % of the diet, which most people think was a little bit a wild idea. And ironically, it worked well, up to 27%. But that was with just corn in the diet and replacing just corn. So now we've done 3 other experiments looking at what happens when you have other ingredients in the diet, like if you're already feeding distillers grains, how much more on top of that can you add the syrup? And it's been quite interesting. The diets don't look good. If feedlots would have driven by our studies, they would have said, well, those diets won't work. But the cattle seem to do okay on them.
And finally, wet distillers, something that was a little surprising to me, and maybe you as well. You're trying to feed, or you're experimenting on feeding spoiled wet distillers grains. Why did you think of doing that?
Yeah, it seems a little funny that we would actually test the impact of feeding spoiled distillers grains, but if you're a smaller operation and you purchase wet distillers grains, which is very competitive, but you need to buy a semi-load quantity and it takes you months or so to feed up, it's very difficult to not have some of it spoil. And so we want to know what's the impact. And what happens is while that's sitting there spoiling, you lose 5 to 12% of the product. But ironically, the cattle don't seem to mind whether it was spoiled or not. We had some non-spoiled compared to spoiled, and cattle did the same, and we did it twice just to look at it.
Erickson says of the 2 spoil tests, one was in the summer and the other in winter, and the tests were done to growing cattle in one test and finishing in the other. Although some parts of the state have snow on the ground now, UNL Extension range and forage specialist Jerry Valesky says most cattle producers have saved hay by not having to feed through many winter storms. But Valesky says the drought in Texas will play a major role in the coming months.
It can definitively be said that forages are probably more valuable than they've ever been. And I've seen, for example, the demand for pasture here in 2012 will be very high. And of course, for those that rent pasture, they can expect to pay significantly higher pasture rental rates, and there's a scarcity of pasture available for rent as well.
Valesky says farmers should make plans to lock up seed for forages as soon as possible, as there are possibilities of shortages in some seeds. And now to forecast what we can expect over the next 7 days, here's UNL Extension statewide climatologist Al Dutcher.
Well, folks, here we are again on Friday morning. During this last week, we've seen a couple systems move through. The primary system that caused most of the major precipitation was in the Monday time frame, where we've seen a broad area of 1 to 2 inch snowfall across most of the southern part of the state. And as we got to the northeastern part of the state, we've seen snowfall totals getting up into the 4-inch range. So it was very welcome moisture, but we're going to need to see a lot more of this before the spring is over to alleviate some of the significant deficits that have been accumulated in the northeastern part of the state and give us at least a hope that as we move into the planting season, we'll have some surface moisture to work with, in the hopes that continuation of rain chances will at least alleviate these drought concerns as we go into the spring. Now, as we move through this next 7-day period, last week we talked about the chance for a significant storm, particularly as we got into the early part of March. That has disappeared from the models in the recent 24 hours, but it's been popping in back and forth. So even though this storm system is out of the woods right now, remember that prior to this big snowstorm at the beginning of the month of February, we've seen the same thing happen. So as we get into the early part of next week, it's very possible this storm system will reappear in the models, and be aware that even though there's a drier forecast for next weekend, it could really change back to a much more significant event if the models have continued to do as they've been doing the last few days. So let's take a look and see what we can expect over this next 7-day period. And as you'll see, there is some colder air to our north that's trying to work into the region, but primarily most of it will shift to the east of Nebraska. So for today, we're probably looking at highs in the upper 30s across the northeast, and toward the southwest, closer to the warmer air over to the southwestern United States, we'll be looking at highs in the mid-40s. Now, this cold front will sweep through the state during the overnight hours and probably be well to the east of Nebraska by the time we get to tomorrow afternoon. So we'll be looking at highs in the southwest. It'll be easily in the mid-40s and maybe even into the low 50s, depending on how quickly this ridge builds in. For the northeast, we'll probably be looking at the upper 30s, possibly mid-30s, depending on how much cold air hangs around. Now, as we get into Sunday, now we see the ridge building into our region, so this looks to be the best day of the weekend. We'll be looking at highs primarily in the mid to upper 30s across the northeast, might be even low 40s depending on how quickly this ridge builds in. Across the southwest, definitely mid 40s and possibly even into the low 50s. Now as we get into Monday, we start to see some of that energy rolling out across Kansas, and that might generate some lighter precipitation, particularly across south central through southeast Nebraska. And as we get into Tuesday, we see that some of this energy hangs back, and that will give us the ability to generate some precipitation from southwest through southeast Nebraska. The farther away you get into northeast Nebraska, the farther away you are from this precipitation shield, so lighter precipitation is expected. We'll see highs primarily in the low to mid 30s across the northeast. to the mid to upper 40s across the southwest. And as we go into Wednesday, now the ridge starts to build in. Colder air just skirts northeastern Nebraska, so we'll be looking at highs in the upper 30s, upper 40s across the southwest. And as we get into Thursday, the ridge starts to build in even closer, so we're going to see a gradual warm up, low 40s across the northeast to the low 50s across the southwest. 8 to 14-day forecast indicates below normal temperatures with that trough moving into the western United States. In terms of precipitation, right now we're indicating below normal precipitation, but bear in mind that if this storm reappears, this would probably be a blown forecast, and we could have some real concerns with travel problems if the storm system reemerges in the early part of next week like it has the last few days. So keep an eye on the weather because it could change rapidly as we move into the early part of next week.
Thanks, Sal. And as we close out the show, we take a look at what's impacting agriculture in this week's Market Journal Twitter feed. The European Union and the United States have reached an organic food agreement. In the agreement, organically produced products will be certified organic when sold in either region. The USDA's Ag Marketing Service says the agreement is a win-win. The marketing service says it will expand opportunities for growers and increase confidence in organic products. The Drovers Cattle Network reports that the timing of daily feeding impacts timing of calves. A South Dakota State University Extension cow-calf specialist says more cows will calve during the daytime if producers are feeding in the evening. Therefore, calves will be more active in the sunlight. UNL's Crop Watch reminds irrigators there will be chemigation certification training sessions offered in western Nebraska throughout the next few months. The first session begins on February 29th, and the sessions continue into April. For more information, contact your local UNL Extension office for dates and locations. Find more from Market Journal through social media on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. You can also visit our website at marketjournal.unl.edu. Next week, we'll report from the Nebraska Pork Industry Day in West Point. Frayne Olson will also join us as our wheat marketing analyst. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension, where you can know how, know now. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
A diesel-powered engine on a farm works hard and operates in a grueling environment. Soy biodiesel fuels stand up to the challenge of powering farm equipment, but are also renewable and environmentally responsible as well. The Nebraska Soybean Board is committed to encouraging the use of soy biodiesel to protect the environment and sustain Nebraska's agriculture. The Nebraska Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.